Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Wealth Defense Radio, the podcast. I am your host, Josh Nahosa, and I am an independent advisor representative for Swan DFW. That, of course, stands for Sleep Well at Night, Dallas-Fort Worth.
Of course it does.
And I am here with Captain Swan, the Swanee, the original Swanster, as they call him on the streets of Brooklyn and also Fort Worth. It is Hector and Josh.
Well, good morning. And, you know, it makes sense now. Ever since I was a kid, people would call me a bird brain. Now I understand what they were saying.
Now we're there. So, Hector is a certified financial planner, which is the top mark in our industry. He's been doing this for a while.
1993.
So he's been doing this for a while. He is experienced, some would say.
Now, Swan only started in 2014, so we're about 11 years old there. But yeah. Okay.
So, today, we're doing part one, I guess, of a two-part thing that Hector's going to explain.
Yeah, I got a question from a friend and client, and he's kind of a good friend, but I don't want to use his name, so we'll just call him, let's just say Lance. And Lance, let's just say, is from Oklahoma. And he read an article, which is pretty impressive for somebody from Oklahoma. Please, no emails, please. He sent it to me and he said, should I be worried? And the article basically said the S&P 500, the stock market is way overpriced. Doom is coming. Mm-hmm. And so to answer his question, first I think today we'll discuss what the market is. And then next week we'll talk about how we've changed from a stock market to a market of stocks. So today it's, what is a benchmark?
Yeah, so I guess today, to summarize all of that into a listenable piece of media, we're gonna talk about what like a stock market is as a whole and what the benchmarks are and what each one of them does. So you've probably heard the terms like the Dow and the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, and you may not know what that means.
Any of those mean, yeah.
But hopefully by the end of this episode, you will. And we have a couple different ways that you can contact us. Those will be on the screen right now or in the description, wherever it is you're watching or listening. Make sure to give us a like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Yeah. Rate us 5 stars if you're on Spotify. Share it maybe if you're on Facebook, or share it with anyone if you're on Facebook.
Yeah.
Or anywhere that you're watching or listening. Let's talk about first a brief overview of maybe like the history of the stock market and how that's progressed.
Yeah. So back in the 20s, in the aughts and the teens and the 20s of 1900, people wanted to know how their individual holding was performing versus a basket of stocks. Because if somebody says your stock made 8% last year, is that good or bad? Well, I don't know. What did the rest of the stocks do? Well, they did 20. Well, then that's bad. Mm-hmm. Well, the other ones did 4. Well, then that's good.
Yeah.
So they were looking for something where you could compare what your individual holding or what individual companies were doing against the market. And they chose, because we were primarily an industrial company. We had just come out of being an agricultural country. And in the 1900s, with the development of the production line by Henry Ford, and of course, especially when we get into the 40s with World War II, all of a sudden we became a manufacturing giant. And so they decided to track 30 industrial companies. And that's what's commonly referred to as the Dow. And the Dow has 30 companies in it. But basically it tracks day to day how that basket of 30 stocks is doing. And that was the first benchmark.
Yeah, so that's just like an industry kind of benchmark.
Yeah.
As like you're taking 30 stocks, kind of combine them, and it gives you a picture of how that's doing.
How all 30 are doing, yeah. And in an overly simplistic way, all they did originally, you just take the price of each of the companies and add them together, and you come up with, say, $8,000 is what one share of each company would, And then at the end of the day, or now during the day, because we have technology that allows us to do that, at the end of the day, if we started at 8,000 and it's at 8,800, well, we had a 10%, rise in the market, and that's how they were measuring how the market as a whole, how that basket was performing. And then you could measure how your individual holding or your individual company was doing. So for a long time, people said, the Dow today and the Dow Industrial or whatever, and it was 30 companies, and that worked really well for a long time.
Yes. But now, as we progress through time, the big one was and still is the S&P 500.
Right. People started to recognize that 30 stocks isn't really a good cross-section of everything that happens in America. And so what was developed then was the Standard & Poor's, or S&P 500. So the S&P 500 was 500 companies, and they still are. And there's a methodology, it's a hard word this early in the morning, to how they get in. And if they decide that one needs to come out, then one needs to go in, because it's always got to be 500. And now we have a bigger cross-section of not only industrial companies, but we have service companies, and we have all kinds of different sectors now represented in the S&P 500. And that's typically what this particular article was referring to, is that the S&P 500 is a little expensive, and expensive is measured by what's called a price-to-earnings ratio, which is usually around 19, and right now it's around 25. So it is a little more expensive than, what it has been in the past. And that's what the article was saying is, hey, the market's overpriced, you should be careful.
So the S&P 500 is just 500 of some of the biggest stocks, and you've heard of most of these companies.
Oh, yeah.
So this is like the Apples, maybe, and Google, and companies that you've heard of.
The Walmarts of the world, the Boeings of the world, GM, just the biggest, we used to say the biggest 500 companies, but they're actually broken into sectors. But you would know most of the S&P 500. Some you won't, but they're still they're large companies and have good track records, and the potential for growth is still good.
Yeah. So the last one, the one that maybe is the most modern, I would say, is the Nasdaq.
Right. What does Nasdaq stand for?
So Nasdaq stands for the National Associations of Securities Dealers Automated Quotation.
Yeah. And so the Nasdaq is everything else has been trading on the New York Stock Exchange, and that's a manually run. It's a bid section, and you have people. We see the guy on TV sometimes with the really bright colors and stuff. And so they're the market makers, and it's really kind of cool. I want to go on the floor one day and watch how that works. So that's still kind of a bid and ask and stuff market, the New York Stock Exchange. The Nasdaq is all electronic. When we enter a trade, we enter it electronically, and it, depending on where the company is trading, it'll trade electronically, and so there's never anybody that gets in it. So the Nasdaq comes along, and the Nasdaq is, since it's a newer exchange, some of the newer companies are in there, and there you're going to have the Apples and the Amazons and all of these new technology companies. And right now, by the way, the top 7 companies in the Nasdaq that are also in the S&P 500 make up 45% of the S&P 500. So you can see that it's pretty skewed when you have 7 companies making up 45% of. So the Nasdaq is primarily a technology-based exchange. And when you take the top 100 Nasdaq companies, and if you were going to trade it as a ETF, the stock symbol is QQQ. But the top 100 tech companies is kind of the evolution of where first we had the industrials, and then we had the manufacturing and some tech and some service. But now we're moving into a new, and we have been in since about middle of, say, 2010 or so. The big bust was in 2000. And so now it's more technology related. And it might make more sense if you were looking at how your company is doing to see it against the S&P 500, but also measure it against the Nasdaq, because sometimes those things don't move in the same direction. And I think that is where, if you wanted to track most portfolios that have these magnificent 7 stocks in them, what they call them, the Nasdaq would be a better benchmark for you to look at.
So I guess if you're going to compare one of these benchmarks to your portfolio, to be fair to your portfolio, you would have to choose the benchmark that more closely resembles what your portfolio looks like. Is that a fair statement?
That's a really good statement. As a matter of fact, when we do our reporting, our quarterly reporting to our clients, for most of them, we show on their quarter update both the Nasdaq and the S&P 500, because many of our, especially some of our clients that have a little more, have bigger portfolios, we need to look at both, because they're not 100% invested in the Nasdaq. So to compare it just purely to the Nasdaq, say the Nasdaq's up 20%, the S&P 500 was up 12, and your portfolio was up 15 or 16, you would say, yep, my portfolio resembles a lot of S&P companies and a lot of technology companies to fall in between the benchmarks. Swan DFW is doing a great job for me.
Yes. I think another thing to drive home that we kind of glossed over, but I do think people would have questions about it, is a stock can be in multiple benchmarks. It could potentially be in all 3 benchmarks. So that would be like, Google could be in both the S&P and the Nasdaq
and the Dow. And I think Apple for a while may have been. I'm not sure that it's still there, but yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so it could be like Amazon or companies like that. You can be in multiple benchmarks. Right. This isn't like a mutually exclusive. That's correct. If I have the Nasdaq, I have this company. But if I have, they can be in both.
They can be in both, or all 3. And what makes the benchmark is obviously all of the neighbors, how many other stocks are in there and what kind of stocks are around them. But yes, they can absolutely be in both. And so this is why a technology-driven portfolio or the Nasdaq as a benchmark, because most of these companies are still growth companies. They're taking everything they make and pouring it back into research and development and growth and building new plants and doing those things. So typically in a growth company, your price to earnings ratio, how we decide if a company is trading, if it's cheap, expensive, or par, is going to be more expensive in the technology companies. And that's why when somebody says the market is overpriced, because the PE right now is 25 and is usually around 18. True, but if 7 technology companies are 45% of the S&P 500, you kind of have to look at that then as, well, what would be happening in the Nasdaq with 96 other technology companies. And so those are the kind of benchmarks, and they have tracked our economy as we went from mostly farming to industrial to service and technology to technology. And now we're beginning to move into a new phase, artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. And, a couple of people have asked me, well, what is that going to look like? I have no idea what it's going to look like. Because I can see the future so well. Let me tell you how well I see it. In 1998, 1999, we had this brand new thing called the internet. Mm-hmm. Al Gore had invented it, he said. And I remember asking questions like, well, what is this internet going to do? And there was people saying, oh man, when this gets going, you're going to be able to have a device and you'll be able to read books on it and play music on it and be able to do a search. You take it to the beach and you can do a search for anything you want. Any information you want will be on there. And I'm sitting there going, who is going to take their laptop to the beach? That's crazy, and people aren't going to use their laptop to make phone calls. They're going to use a phone. Had no idea that what was happening is what he was describing as today's modern phone. So some people had a pretty good idea, but a lot of people didn't. And so as we look forward into AI, what is that going to look like? I mean, there's, I think the guy that the CFO of Google said that AI is going to be more transformative to the human race than fire was. That's a pretty big statement.
That's a pretty high bar.
Yeah,
I won't lie to you.
Yeah. So is he right or wrong? Check with me in 20 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, for somebody even of that stature, and to say something like that, you go, whoa. Because even if he's half right, it's still going to be a huge difference as to how AI is going to change our lives.
Yeah. Let's backtrack about 10 or 15 minutes. You dropped a term, and we'll finish the episode with this. The Magnificent Seven, just so that our listeners know what that is, because you said it kind of as a throwaway, everybody knows, but that's not necessarily true. And the companies, what that's referring to is it's 7 stocks, 7 companies that are so magnificent that they have their own thing. That's not a benchmark. That just is 7 companies. Those companies are Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, which is Google, Meta, which used to be Facebook, Nvidia, and Tesla.
Yeah.
So just if you've made it to this part of the episode and you've been wondering, what is the Magnificent Seven? That is what it is. It's not its own benchmark. That is different than the Nasdaq, the Dow, the S&P 500.
Yeah. And they're standalone companies, and they're the companies that have been leading our economy and transforming our lives, and they'll continue to do that. It's just, a company we'd never heard of 10 years ago, a little company called NVIDIA, is now one of the leading AI chip manufacturing companies in the world. And like I said, nobody knew what that was 10 years ago. And so there's stocks right now that we don't know what they are or what they do, who they are or what they do, but in 10 years it may be part of these magnificent whatever they call it.
So if you have any questions about anything that you've heard or about retirement or any of the other financial questions that you have, we have a couple different ways that you can contact us. Like I said at the beginning, we have a phone number, and that is 888-792-6339. That spells out 888-SWAN-DFW. And we have an email address, and that is info@swandfw.net. That's info, like short for information. All of those will be in the description wherever it is you are watching or listening.
Yeah, and I think as we're closing, people would say, why is this important? Well, because we want to make sure as we put a portfolio together that you're getting the maximum rate of return for the amount of risk you want to take. And that's why understanding where these things sit and what they do is good.
Sweet.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Please, if you have any questions or if you disagree with me, shoot us an email or give us a call. And, we'd love to have a conversation with you. So thank you very much and be blessed.
The preceding content is informational only and based on information available when created. It is not an offer or solicitation, nor is it tax or legal advice. It does not consider your financial circumstances and objectives and may not be suitable for you.